18-wheelers that are coming in and out of it every day. That building is a Department of Homeland Security designated critical infrastructure asset, which means it needs to be protected at all costs. And finally, the potential removal of the left-hand turn heading northbound on South Sharp Street, approaching the intersection of West Henrietta Street. So basically, when you're leaving the neighborhood, the original plan included removing that left-hand turn so that you can no longer get on Conway to access 395 and 395, 95, as well as South Howard Street. So our office intervened and had a number of meetings with DOT over the past couple months to share with them some of these concerns that we're intimately familiar with because we live in the neighborhood. And I'm pleased to say that I think the plan that's going to be presented to you all this evening is something that folks that live in the community, as well as bicycle advocates and folks who use this bicycle infrastructure, are going to be very pleased with. But in short, this plan is not going to result in a reduction of parking spaces as is. There is a potential to lose up to approximately 6 parking spaces should the flow of vehicular traffic heading northbound on South Sharp Street require a second turn lane to turn right heading to the Inner Harbor. So we've made a ton of progress on that issue. The second issue is that the left-hand turn lane going onto Conway to give you access to I-95 and I-395 will remain protected and will stay in place. And the operations of institutions in the neighborhood, specifically the Otterbein Swim Club, the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond and Otterbein, Old Otterbein United Methodist Church, as well as the Baltimore Convention Center will not be impacted. And those institutional stakeholders in the neighborhood, which were originally not reached out to after our office intervened, have been engaged on this. So they understand all the impacts and sit through this meeting, have an open heart and an open mind as to what you're going to hear tonight. I think what we've asked you to do is something that works for everyone, recognizing that it's critically important that we continue to push forward on sustainable transportation. And one piece of that larger puzzle does have to do with bicycle infrastructure to reduce our reliance on that. So with that, I'm going to be sitting in the back. We'll be sticking around. Nancy Mead from my office, who I think is probably more popular than me and everyone knows, will be here as well. So if you have any questions, feel free to come up to one of us at the end of the presentation. This is just the beginning of the conversation. So I think there's 3 alternatives that are going to be proposed this evening, if I'm not mistaken.
A couple of different options, yes.
So purpose of tonight is for DOT to get back so that they can take that back to DOT and continue to think through what this project could look like. So with that, thank you all. Appreciate you all showing up tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next slide, Tiffany. Okay, so this is a hybrid meeting tonight. So there are folks online who've joined us through Cisco WebEx. We've got several folks here in the meeting room who will be monitoring the online portion. So anyone who posts a question, raises their hand, wants to speak at the end, we've got some folks who are monitoring that. They will relay your questions to me. And if you want to be recognized online, we will acknowledge you and then we'll unmute you so that you can speak at the end. All right, next slide. All right, so here's tonight's agenda, and I apologize for holding this up to my face, but there's a microphone in here so they can hear me online. So as you can see, the presentation, we've done a PowerPoint. I'll try to be brief so we can spend as much time as we can at the end to answer some of your questions. We do have staff monitoring the chat, as I mentioned before. Please take any notes, write down the slide that you saw that you wanted to ask about later so we can go back to it quickly. Our lead bike planner, Patrick Patterson, couldn't be here tonight, but I think our traffic engineer, Noor Cutter, may be participating online. I'll double check that. And then we will jump into the Q&A at the end. We also have some partners from the Department of Planning and the Parking Authority and our Community Liaison Office here as well. All right, next slide. Okay, so back in 2017, DOT determined there was a need to extend the current north-south separated bike lane which ends abruptly at West Pratt Street. And we identified this as a high-value connection, and so anyone who wants a low-stress bike path south to Otterbein or Federal Hill would have to bike east to get to the separated facility that circles the Inner Harbor, and they shouldn't have to do that. DOT sought and was awarded grant funds from the Kim Lamphere Bikeways Network to support multiple bike network projects, of which this is one. We received a grant of about $405,000. We're sharing that between 4 projects across the city. And then once the final design is selected, construction would take place in summer of 2024, so next summer. All right, next slide. So why do we think people want to bike in this part of the city? Obviously, there are numerous destinations in this corridor, the close proximity to the Inner Harbor, downtown. Additionally, the infrastructure upgrade doesn't just benefit bicyclists, but also joggers, scooter users as well. Most importantly, the project is for all ages and abilities, and we're going to talk about that as we go through the presentation. And most of you should be familiar with the Complete Streets Manual, how it's an essential guidance document for projects like this one. I've already mentioned how this will benefit more than just bikes, but the manual ensures that what we're proposing will always focus on safety, security, comfort, access, and convenience for all users. Additionally, as a non-car-oriented project, this proposal seeks to address the disparity in transportation access decisions from the past that have made our city largely dependent on car-oriented roadways and doesn't serve all of our citizens. Next slide. So if you're curious about crash data, over the last 3 years, there have been a significantly low number of crashes along this segment. So this is shown here as a bold line, bold red line. There have been 7 total crashes over the last 3 years, which is significantly below city average. All are located at intersections of both Sharp and Pratt and Sharp and Conway, which is where a lot of our design focus is going to be, and heavily influences our preferred design. As you can see here, the intersection of North Charles and Conway is the most dangerous intersection. It's got that red square next to it. There were 23 crashes occurring there over the last 3 years. Next slide. And because of this, we think Sharp Street's a logical choice for a low-stress bike route. Over this 3-year period, Otterbein saw 110 crashes. By comparison, Federal Hill saw 195. Fells Point saw 460. Downtown saw over 1,500. So crashes are mostly associated with the Sharp-Conway intersection along South Charles Street down to East Lee Street and along Gwynn Falls Parkway. Most of the rest of Otterbein, most of the rest of Otterbein sees relatively few crashes during the last 3 years. Only 3 involved pedestrians and 1 involved a scooter. Next slide. All right, so here are some examples of the existing signage that you'll see along Sharp Street, North Liberty Street, and in Otterbein. You can see in the Otterbein examples, while there is signage along the sidewalk, there's nothing actually on the pavement, directly within a driver's line of sight. So we will continue to utilize the existing signage for this project, but we're proposing to include some new pavement markings that you'll see here on the right. This proposal would formalize this route with new white Sharrow markings on green backgrounds and bike boxes at major intersections such as Pratt and Conway. And we're going to show you how we incorporate those pavement markings into the design. Next slide. So this is an overview of the proposed route. We've laid the aerial photo on its side, so the north is to the right, broken the project up into 2 primary segments. The first segment is the portion that runs from Pratt Street intersection to the Conway Street intersection, and then the second segment runs from the Conway Street intersection down to Solo Gibbs Park. The reason for that is that each segment has a distinct design element to it. Next slide. So on the left is an aerial photo of the intersection with the north at the top. The right image is a Google Street View image looking south across the intersection. As you can see, the separated bike lane currently ends here, and we're going to talk about how we propose to extend that cycle track across the intersection. Slide. So this is the West Pratt Street to West Conway Street segment, cycle track oriented to the west. Next slide. So in order to achieve the cycle track west design, the design calls for creating a horizontal crossing for bicyclists, a bike box, parallel to Pratt Street that would allow them to orient themselves on the west or right-hand side of Sharp Street. So essentially, when the pedestrian signal says you can cross Sharp Street, bicyclists would then use the green bike box to cross the face of traffic and orient themselves on the right-hand side. This allows cyclists to make a crossing straight across Pratt Street and converts the existing West Side Drive lane into a continuation of the two-way cycle track. This is what we call a two-stage crossing, and the traffic signal timing would be modified to accommodate this. So where there are 2 lanes of traffic going south, one would be replaced with a two-way cycle track. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. So option 2, which is cycle track west, involves simply continuing the existing separated bike lane across Pratt Street along the east side of the street. It's a single stage crossing, so cyclists would follow the pedestrian crossing signal. The major trade-off here is that we're simply trading simplicity at this intersection for complexity at Conway Street, which has historically seen crashes. So next slide. Here we show a side-by-side comparison between the west, which is the top image, and the east orientation, which is the bottom image for the separated bike lane on the west side of Pratt Street to Conway Street segment, to give you kind of a comprehensive view of the differences and to allow for some comparison. Right, next slide. As we move south along the segment of Sharp Street. Sure, yeah, go back.
May we ask a question?
Well, we would like to get through the presentation first, and then we can take all the questions at the end.
What slide number is this?
This is, yes. I apologize for that. What we'll do is we'll create a survey. We have a survey created to allow you to select which options you like. We'll blow the images up on the website so that you can see them clearly, and then you can download them and kind of zoom in and out.
So the red are bus lanes?
Yes, those are the dedicated
Okay.
bus lanes.
We're proposing reducing the road under the convention center to a single lane for cars.
Yes,
Is that correct?
right. So there are 2 now. There would be 1 in the future. Yes, go ahead, please. Okay. So as we move south along the segment of Sharp Street that's adjacent to the convention center, these are 2 street profiles that depict the 2 different orientations for the separated bike lane. West orientation's on top, east orientation on the bottom. Correct. So today there are cars that use this lane.
That would just be a bike.
Correct. All the way to Conway. Yep. Okay, next slide. So this is the Sharp Street, West Conway Street intersection crossing. So now we've arrived at the Conway Street intersection, which is the more complicated intersection. We have 2-way traffic on Conway with a median, as well as 2-way traffic on Sharp Street, and with a cycle track orientation west. So the bike lanes are on the right-hand side. That's the first image over here. Cyclists traveling south toward Otterbein would have a single stage crossing. They'll wait in the green bike box at the intersection, cross with the pedestrian signal, and then cyclists traveling north toward the convention center would make a 2-stage crossing. They would be moving along the crosswalk to the north sidewalk with the PED signal, and then crossing Conway with the PED signal to the east before entering the separated bike lane. So it's easier for you to come this way. Down here, you'd be crossing crosswalk first and then crossing the intersection.
If you're a bicycle.
If you're a bicyclist, correct. Okay. Option 2 on the right-hand side reflects the cycle track east design. Let's see if I can. Okay. So cyclists traveling south toward Otterbein would have a 2-stage crossing, meaning they would orient themselves on the right-hand side or west side of Sharp Street with the pedestrian signal first, before crossing Conway with the second pedestrian signal. And then cyclists traveling north from Otterbein would utilize a single-stage crossing, going directly across Conway Street and entering into the separated bike lane. So the one major change we're proposing in both options is that, as you can see down here, what we want to do is make this lane wider, because in its current configuration, it's tight, and as bicyclists come across the intersection in both of these options, they're jockeying with traffic to enter this lane. And so the proposal that we floated was to eliminate the dedicated left turn and have all the traffic in the single lane so you can go left, straight, or right out of the single lane here. That dedicated left is about 8 feet wide. And so what we'd be doing is splitting 4 feet to the southbound lane and 4 feet extra to the northbound lane. All right, next slide. That's one option. The other option is we leave it the way it is. And then you keep the dedicated left and the straight, the through and the right turn lane. All right, slide 18, please. Okay, so for this slide, if you were to imagine yourself standing in the middle of the intersection, and you're looking north towards the convention center on the right-hand side, the top image represents the existing condition of Sharp Street, and the bottom image represents the proposed condition. So you can see the continuation of the two-way cycle track is made possible by replacing the right turn only lane. This would be a single stage crossing, so as soon as the traffic signal turns green, bicyclists would be permitted to cross Conway Street. So right now there's a dedicated...
Actually, not that third lane.
Not a third
That's a
lane.
Right here?
parking lane. That is not a right-hand turn only.
So what we've seen in the aerials is there's a bus lane that's further to the left. It kind of disappears into this lane, and then there's a right turn.
Direction are we facing right now?
Hi, I'm sorry. Can you hand the microphone for the folks on the who are online so that they can hear as well?
We're
Thank
in the
you.
intersection. We're facing north at Sharp Street coming south. We're looking towards the convention center.
Okay.
So you've got, this is Conway. And we're in the intersection facing north towards the convention center.
I thought you had said we were facing, coming south looking.
So this is, the idea was this is your point of view here. You're standing here in the middle, facing north. The convention center's to the north. So, okay.
Alluded to a bus lane.
There's some sort of, if we go back further, we could see it, but there's extra space if you go back further on the left-hand side, and it kind of disappears into this lane.
Yeah, okay, you just said it was a bus lane.
Sorry, I misspoke.
Definitely not a bus lane.
Right.
Buses frequently just park there,
Right. That's what I saw in the aerial. It was a bus kind of parked there.
but they,
Okay.
yeah, they park, they park there.
Okay.
They do, they block the trail, parking the bus.
There's no effective lane there.
Okay.
Means that
Yes, there's no lane. Right. There's space, but there's no lane. Okay. All right, next slide. So this is Sharp Street, West Conway Street intersection option 2. Out of here. So if you were to imagine yourself standing in the middle of the intersection again, and we are looking north towards the convention center, on the right-hand side, the top image represents the existing condition of Sharp Street. The bottom image represents option 2, or the cycle track east design. And so you can see the continuation of the two-way cycle track is made possible by replacing the right turn only lane. This would be a two-stage crossing, similar to the two-stage crossing at Pratt Street. So bicyclists, scooter users, etc., would utilize the bike box to move to the west with the pedestrian signal first, and then cross Conway Street when the southbound traffic gets a green light. Okay. Next slide. Okay. So for this slide, if you were to imagine yourself standing in the middle of the intersection, this is again still Conway intersection. You're looking south towards Otterbein. On the right-hand side, the top image represents the existing condition of Sharp Street. So you have the dedicated left, you have a through right, and you have a parking lane. As I mentioned earlier, one major design change that we're floating is that there are currently 2 lanes of traffic facing north, and we have a dedicated left and a through right. And what we were proposing to do was eliminate the dedicated left, split the width of that lane between the north and southbound traffic, and then allow northbound traffic to turn left, right, or go straight. And the reason for that is with cars and bikes jockeying for position going south, we didn't want to make bikes or scooters feel like they're getting pushed onto the sidewalk. And so corresponding modifications will need to be made to traffic signals to allow for this. We'll talk about that in some more detail. Next slide. No, we do not lose parking. Right, so this indicates that this is a parking lane here. It's preserved in both those options. Okay, so northbound traffic would be combined into one lane, slightly wider than what exists now, so it would be about 4 feet wider. And it would be able to go east, west, or north. Likewise, the southbound lane would be widened by about 4 feet, and this would allow bikes and cars to merge safely into this lane after crossing the intersection. The additional width would only extend about 75 feet from the intersection, just past the Federal Reserve entrance on the right, after which the 2 lanes will reduce in width to their existing size. A new bike box shown here in light green would be painted in front of the stop bar for cars. This would allow cyclists and others to wait. It's because we are proposing, right now there's 3 lanes here. You have a parking lane, you have a through right, and then you have a dedicated left. And when you eliminate the dedicated left, you split that space between south and northbound traffic. So both these 2 corresponding lanes get wider.
Bicyclists would wait in that green box.
Right, so if you're heading north,
Yes.
if you get to this point where there's still a red light, you would be able to wait here inside the green box in front of vehicle traffic.
So all the bicyclists would advance in front of the car.
Right, so if you're back here, you're waiting for the green light.
Wait, when you say bicycle,
Everybody's waiting for the green light.
there's bicyclists waiting in that box.
Correct.
In the direction of the bicycle.
They can go right, they can go straight. I don't think they're going to go left, but right or straight. Well, here, you're just going to go straight.
How would the cars do that?
They're going to wait until the bicycle traffic crosses the intersection.
Are the lights going to be retimed?
Yes, ma'am.
Right now, hardly any cars get through time.
Yes, retiming of the lights and signals will occur as a part of this, yes.
I ride a bike and I turn left.
You do?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, is that where?
But
I drive there every day.
you'll be allowed to make that left. Yeah. Okay. Next slide. Sorry. So here's an overhead aerial view of the segment. So as we enter the Otterbein neighborhood, you'll observe that we've switched from a separated bike lane that was protected by flex posts to what we call sharrows. Sharrows are the green boxes painted onto the pavement with the white chevrons and the image of a bicycle painted on them. These images mean that drivers are now sharing the road with cyclists. So the sharrow design would extend from the Conway intersection all the way down to Solo Gibbs Park. Next slide. So we also wanted the community to be aware of the opportunity to incorporate a placemaking art element at the Hill Street intersection. So the image on the right is from Remington. It showcases striped bump outs protected by flex posts and planters with artwork placed within. And these elements have been proven to make intersections safer by slowing traffic and making pedestrians more visible. Next slide.
That's hardwood.
It's an example.
Will, would you mind repeating that question for the folks online?
Hold on one second. So the question was, if we were proposing the specific artwork that you see in this slide, and this is just an example from another community in Baltimore. Next slide. So staff went out to that intersection, did some rough measurements just to see what the spacing was for the lanes. and the blue line kind of represents, I think, where we think the Fed Reserve trucks come out here and then make this left, and this line should be on the other side of the yellow, but next slide. So this is kind of some rough sketches of where the bump outs might go. So as you can see, we've avoided placing them in the path of that truck movement from Hill Street. But as proposed, the location where the man is standing with the dog would be protected by flex posts and have paint underneath them, some sort of artwork, making him safer and more visible to traffic. Also, if the community doesn't like the aesthetic of flex posts, we're open to considering alternatives that are safe and visible, such as planters or something a little bit more appropriate for the neighborhood. The main caveat is that whatever you decide, it just needs to have a reflective tape applied to it so that drivers can see it at night and during inclement weather. But you'll see here, these are the Cheryl markings on the ground, and the 3 bump outs that we were looking at doing are on the opposite side from where the truck movement is. All right, next slide. So the Streets of Baltimore website, this project has a page there, and there is a survey associated with it, so you can see each of these slides in more detail and then show us or indicate to us which ones you like, which ones you don't like. And there's an open text box at the bottom that'll say, is there anything else you want us to know, any questions you want to ask us? We were using the website earlier today, and there was a bit of a problem with it, so I would say just be patient. We're going to have that up and running, and the survey will be operating as soon as possible. But at this point, I can take questions. So if you want to start here in the room, just raise your hand. Yes, go ahead.
So, what the left turn lane on,
Yes.
no one have a stage. Side, showing it's still there. So, where is that?
Well, we're not saying that it's not proposed. Obviously, the way it is now, it could just simply stay that way.
Heading southbound,
Yes.
I often down, what's the convention center.
Okay.
What I noticed, trains are pretty right, and a lot of traffic. Those of us who live here in the neighborhood can go straight, because if we stay to the left, get through. Was it just a single lane southbound under the convention center? Then it seems to me we'll be stuck behind what's currently 2 lanes of traffic turning right to get out of town. We're just trying to get into our neighborhood
Sure.
right here. And how do we do that? Use that to one lane.
Right. So we asked that question internally. What effect is removing that lane on Sharp Street going to have on a day-to-day basis? The consensus in our traffic division was that it would have very little impact, but there's going to be peak hour.
Have you done that?
There's,
I've
I made that argument. I said, well, what about during peak hour in the mornings and in the afternoons when everyone's trying to get out of the city? I'm not going to tell you to your face that I've done this because I haven't driven that in the afternoon, but my folks tell me that there's little impact that's why they proposed it.
So maybe it would be a good idea if you did do that.
Yes, sir.
Southbound, at rush hour, there was a constant flow of 2 lanes turning right onto Conway.
Yes.
If you're trying to make a left turn from the northbound Sharp at that intersection, if you funnel all that traffic into a single lane, first of all, I suspect there'll be so many cars at rush hour, it will back up to the intersection all the way at Pratt.
Mhm.
Those cars won't be able to go through. There will never be a chance for people to make a left turn. Plus, you're routing all the bicyclists across the street there too, plus all the pedestrians. And they're going to hold up those people making right-hand turn. You're funneling 2 lanes of traffic to 1 lane to make 1 turn. It's impossible.
Okay.
It is simply impossible.
Yes, ma'am.
During non-COVID times, and on people on track. Prior to COVID, they had normal doing traffic studies on COVID.
Right.
So that's
Right. What we did during this analysis was we compared traffic studies pre-COVID and post-COVID. Now, obviously,
Just a quick thing. Can you restate the questions for the people listening online?
sure. So the question was, did DOT examine traffic studies for the community or for the area in this project during COVID or, before COVID or after COVID. And what we did was we looked at traffic studies pre-COVID and compared them to traffic studies or a traffic study post-COVID, obviously because COVID had a significant effect on traffic. So, yes, ma'am, that's what we did. Yes, sir. Right, for northbound traffic coming out of Outer Banks, yes. Well, as far as the segment from Conway to Solar Gibbs Park, if we leave the left-hand turn lane, the dedicated left-hand turn lane, nothing else would change. You still see the sharrows. I mean, it's a very minimal element to the whole project. One of the two options we discussed. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Heading north,
Yes.
cross Conway,
Okay.
left,
Okay.
those two opposing right turn lanes, they're all commuters.
Mhm.
They don't care about cyclists, they don't care about anybody else other than them getting home to wherever it is they're going. It is a death trap. Okay? So I don't know what you want to do, but it's unfair to me, who's trying to get across any which way I can,
Mhm.
to be constantly having my life, thrown to the dogs here. It's crazy there. Is there any way we can fix that so it's safe for bike riders?
I think we'll take another look at that because I don't think we considered that there was a lot of bike traffic making that left. Right.
Everybody just go to the hospital.
Absolutely. We'll take a look at that. Yeah.
Well, we have a few raised hands online. Would it be okay to go to those?
Paying attention that the pedestrian or the bicycle
Okay.
has the right of way.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Yes. So resurfacing as a part of this project has not been an element we've considered, but if that's something that the community wants, when the survey goes up, please let us know and we'll factor that in. You want to do one more before we? Yeah. So yes, generally speaking, wider lanes are considered more amenable to faster speeds. In the one particular example that we give for Otterbein, the segment of wider lanes would only be 75 feet long, and that's to accommodate bicyclists crossing the intersection. So that's why it's only a temporary space. Let's start here on the left. Yes, sir.
Be wire lane. A lot of drivers, the second they get any.
Yeah.
I've seen this as a driver. I want cycle infrastructure here.
That's
what I'm moving to.
yeah.
Use it.
It's an interesting recommendation. We'll factor that in as well. I think we didn't consider that in particular, but it's a good idea. Yes, sir. Okay, so sure. The question was, would we consider adding a speed bump at that southbound lane right before the Federal Reserve entrance, Sharp Street? Yes, sir.
How do you consider sharrows always?
Well, in this particular instance, Otterbein, in our estimation, is a low traffic, low volume residential community. And so most of the time we don't see a lot of speeding traffic going down toward on this particular segment. So the idea was, well, we don't have the room to do a separate facility. Sharrows makes more sense. Yes, sir. Okay.
Currently as a cyclist, I do a bit of Harvard, dangers, general light to this. Trying to do about this turns. I think that's just.
Mhm.
And also the sheriffs too, if you're gonna get a combined 8 feet from moving that turn potentially, right? You guys gotta consider other things.
Right.
Could you use that to still create a Maryland style where you reserve the parking next to reserve and then send that down? Right?
I have not considered that, but I'll have to bounce that off of my traffic engineer. Yeah. Sir, in the back, yes. Sure. Right, signal changes. Unfortunately, that's outside of my area of expertise, but I've been told by our traffic engineers that based on what we're proposing to do, there would have to be some signal changes, timing especially.
One southbound has like and what?
Yeah, I would say put that in the comment when the website goes up and let us know. Yeah. Start back down here in the front. Yes, yes, ma'am. Okay. Can we go to slide 23 real quick?
This is it's the Hill Street intersection.
Imagine this. Yes.
That's a four-way stop. Is it, I just asking, is it normal to do stuff like this when there's a four-way stop?
Well, we've done it. I mean, you've got what, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 lanes of traffic coming together here as well. So yeah, it's possible to do it.
Just commenting, Hill Street is a four-way intersection, four-way stop.
Yeah. It's if the community wants it, and if you believe that there's conflicts between pedestrians and vehicles, if there's high speed, if there isn't, then maybe there's no need. Yes, sir. Yeah.
It's a 5-way. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Right. So you have, yeah, 1 lane, 2, 3. This little one here, 4, and that one 5. Yep.
To the next.
Yeah. Next slide.
So basically, the east side of Hill, 20-foot breakout.
Yes.
So you're basically saying you're going to take half of that intersection away.
Potentially. What that does is it tightens the entrance here, forces folks to slow down. There'll be flex posts or some other monumental feature protecting pedestrians, whoever is going to be waiting in that area.
That would be a very tight turn.
The idea is, right.
I don't see the reason, like, we're gonna be banging into the two-way street.
Yeah.
It's gonna be really tight.
Right. Well, the point is to slow down. Yes.
But if there's stop signs there, nobody's up fast.
Well, assuming that some people aren't following the stop signs. Right.
Hey, Will, if we could go to a few of the online questions, they are adding up here. So I'd like to switch to them for a minute.
Will there be any traffic calming interventions on the segment where there are sharrows only? So we did have one gentleman talk about the idea of doing at least 1, maybe more speed bumps. It's not something that we had considered originally because I think we thought that this portion in Otterbein was a slow street, but we can certainly think about some things that the community might want to slow traffic down. There are things besides speed bumps that we could do. Yeah. One more?
Chatter. Why is widening the lanes in Sharps south of Conway necessary? The bicycles are allowed and encouraged to use the whole lane. Are you encouraging cars to be passed by cyclists?
So we're not proposing to widen the lane to make it so that cars can go faster. What we've done is we've had folks in our office bike that route, cross that intersection, and what they've told us is that they're jockeying to get into that lane with traffic, and that oftentimes vehicles really don't pay them much mind, and they feel like they're being forced onto the sidewalk. So the idea was, well, if we can give them a little bit more space, add some signage that we can remind drivers that you're sharing the road with bicyclists and other vehicles like scooters, and that will allow for bicyclists to kind of merge into that lane seamlessly with traffic. But it's not a done deal to say that. This is just a proposal. The other proposal is just to leave the left turn lane where it is and keep the southbound lane as tight as it is currently.
And last line question,
Yeah.
Jonathan says, didn't the inventor of Sharrows admit they were a bad idea?
I can't speak to that, unfortunately. I'm not sure. Okay.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and or allow a few folks to talk who have their hand raised online.
Okay.
So I'll start with the first one that pops up, Omar Hamza. I'm going to unmute you so you can unmute yourself.
All right, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Yeah, so my name's Omar Hamza. I live up in Madison Park, and I frequently come down to, Fed Hill. Has two of my favorite brunch spots, Spoons and Blue Moon 2. So I do like to come down there pretty often on my bike. And Sharp Street is one of the streets that's down on my commute. So first of all, I do want to thank Councilman Costello and Will and DOT here for putting this meeting back up. I was disappointed the first time around when it got postponed. I understand why, but thank you guys for bringing this back. So quite frankly, I'm a little bit disappointed with the proposal here. I'm disappointed in the fact that none of the options really present a option for cyclists to get down to Fed Hill via Sharp Street without a two-stage crossing. I mean, with every additional crossing, that's an increased risk for a cyclist to get into an accident or have a car hit them that's not paying attention. And quite honestly, it really doesn't take much for a driver to keep going or run a red or run a stop sign or inadvertently try to make a left or right and hit a cyclist. So it's unfortunate that there doesn't seem to be a way to do that. And I think that raises another question as to, unfortunately, I didn't take the slide number down, but I think you mentioned where Sharp Street turns to Sharrows. There was a removal of one of the turn lanes and widening of the street. Now, I'm curious why the parking lane can't be moved a little further out to add a protected lane on the east side of Sharp as it continues down past Conway. I think we can all see and admit that Sharrows are a failed experiment. Drivers don't want to be stuck behind cyclists. Cyclists don't want to share the road with cars because they feel unsafe. I really think that, there should be more consideration taken to that. As we're building Baltimore to be a modern city and a city of the future, I think we have to take into account that a lot of the folks that come to the city, such as myself, come to the city because of the fact that it's so accessible via any means of transportation, via public transit, via cycling, via walking. Sharp Street is also on my run route when I run down to Fed Hill from further north in the district. And the last thing I want to add is, studies show that protected bike lanes actually increase the number of folks that use bikes. That takes cars off the road. That's less traffic. There's a study from Minneapolis which showed that over about 7 years of building bike lanes, the share of bike users on those protected lanes increased by about 69%. And I think Baltimore is well poised to be a modern city, and to do that, I really think that more consideration has to be taken for not only just cyclists, but individuals in mobility scooters. I think many of us have seen the brave, handicapped and elderly individuals that will take their scooters out in the middle of the road with no fear of death. And I think we can all admire that, but none of us would like to see any of those individuals to have to put themselves in harm's way. So that's, I'll leave it at that, so I just don't take too much time, but those are sort of my thoughts on this proposal.
All right, thank you.
So real quick, Omar, I know we've talked before. I want to thank you for your advocacy of cycle infrastructure. I know we had an opportunity to talk during the Mayor's Bicycle Advisory Commission meeting back in maybe March or April timeframe. I do want to be clear for the folks who are attending the meeting in person and those who may have joined late online, as well as folks who joined us late before I spoke. The reason why this project was delayed, and this is not a reflection on Mr. Etheridge or his immediate team that are here this evening. I want to be very clear. The Department of Transportation did not do adequate community outreach prior to what was the originally scheduled meeting, and they did not reach out to institutional stakeholders such as the Swim Club, Federal Reserve, Old Otterbein United Methodist Church, and the Convention Center, institutions which have been there for decades, to understand their operational needs. It's the same situation, and Omar, as you know, that we were dealing with on the proposed cycle track infrastructure in your neck of the woods on Utah Place in Central West. So what we've tried to do is make sure that DOT has been having consistent and ongoing communication with those institutional stakeholders so that their operational needs are brought to the forefront, and that plans aren't being inadvertently leaked prior to those institutional stakeholders being alerted to those plans, which is unfortunately what had happened on this. There was a commitment to move forward with the meeting, move forward with the project. That commitment remains in place for this and for any other cycle track issues that I've had to get involved in. But that has been, over my nearly 9 years on the council, and probably this is the 9th or 10th cycle track project, that has been the pattern each and every single time. I'm confident with the leadership of the new director at DOT, Corinne Johnson, and folks that are working on these projects like Mr. Etheridge, that we've gotten to a much better place in terms of community outreach and institutional outreach. So, Omar, thank you again for continuing to stay engaged on this issue.
Of course, and thank you for clarifying. I understand it's a difficult process to ensure that all the proper stakeholders are informed. So I appreciate that, and I'd like to see something to hopefully go forward.
Micah, did you want to do one more?
Yes, please. We have 6 raised hands, so I'd like to get to all of those. So we have Carl. I'm going to unmute you, and you can then unmute yourself.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. This is Carl Shapiro. I just want to say that this isn't a cycle track project. It's a Sheriff's project. Sheriffs are not acceptable because they are dangerous. And I think that's the end of the conversation on that. It's just a bad design. It needs to go back from the start, and you need to produce something that is protected and safe. The second thing I want to say is that this project is essentially prioritizing cars over other kinds of sustainable transportation infrastructure. And, we're all experiencing now these crazy wildfire smokes caused by just the beginning of climate change. This is going to get worse. We're going to have to deal with this. And one of the ways we're going to deal with this is to reduce the amount of car traffic and pollution that we emit. And this is not going to get us there. The last thing I want to ask, I think this is for the government, in terms of outreach that was done, I understand the institutions in the area were given, I guess, a pre-briefing or outreach. But were other groups, for example, like Baltimore, included in that kind of pre-outreach?
So Baltimore has, Carl, thank you for the question. And I know we were playing phone tag on some Seton Hill related issues yesterday, so feel free to give me a call later this evening.
Okay,
yeah, absolutely. Baltimore has an ongoing dialogue with Department of Transportation. They're a stakeholder that has a seat at the Mayor's Bicycle Advisory Commission. And my understanding is that they've had several communications with Mr. Patterson on this project as well as other projects. I think where I'm getting at on the institution outreach, and it's similar to what we saw on Utah Place, where we have 7 institutions on Utah Place, of which 4 of them have been there for over 110 years. These are institutions that are a part of our community. They have operational needs, and we need to make sure that DOT is at least talking to them, even if they don't agree, even if we're talking about a dedicated bike lane as opposed to Sharrows, that they are at least having the conversation so that they are even aware of the fact that in the case of the Federal Reserve, that there are 20 to 25 18-wheelers that come in and out of there each day. And that is going to continue for as long as the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond is in Otterbein in perpetuity, because there's a national security issue associated with that. So I just want to make kind of the role that I'm playing. I'm not dictating what the project looks like. I'm trying to dictate what the outreach from DOT looks like so that they are better informed before they come to the community, so that we don't spend and waste all of your valuable time 45 minutes talking about, well, how are the 18-wheelers going to get in and out? Because DOT has now, after my office's intervention, had those conversations, they now understand those.
Carl? Yes, ma'am in the orange. Okay. Okay. Okay.
Micah, do you have who was next in line online here?
I'm sorry,
sorry.
we're just speaking to the audience.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Will, we can't hear if you can repeat the question or pass the mic over.
Yeah.
I walk for neighborhood.
Sure.
Maybe
Okay. Okay.
it's 3 times. Out or the rest of it, I don't get your off enough to really understand the traffic there. They also rode for greater than a decade from Maryland Avenue all the way down from into my neighborhood. My children's school home. Watched it go from the where they could dedicate like concerned it would cause problems. Some problems when it's drop off is at the Baltimore the arts. It's something that you can overcome. However, when you get to the intersection right there, the convention center, there are 3 lanes. Almost every morning, there are cars coming, heading east there that block the box.
Okay.
If you do not get to that farthest right lane, you're not going to get through. Frequently, there are buses that Regency and in periods of time. Maybe they are waiting on time. I don't know. Maybe they're waiting to start their route. I don't know why, but it is constantly
Okay.
So already this lane on the far right, it's not a lane.
Okay.
It's almost blocked by a bus. It's not even a legitimate lane. The far left lane is a left turn lane. The lights are not synchronized properly.
Right.
So even when you can go straight, if you get stuck in that one, you cannot go straight because people are waiting their left turn signal to turn left. Again, to block the box. So under that bridge, that is like when we had the Grand Prix in Baltimore, everybody, that's it. You know, I'm like a race car driver. You know, everybody is that way.
Yeah.
Because they want to make the light. Okay? And those of us who are back in our neighborhood, I mean, we all navigate this as best as we can. I do think there needs to be something, but I don't think you guys have done enough investigation to figure it out. I do want to preserve much historical, but I don't want to see art emblazoned all over the road. And I do agree with my neighbor here that if you create these little boxed off things, you're going to make it very difficult to turn. You're heading north on Sharp and you're turning on the hill, and then the fire trucks that go through. Just a lot of suggestion that goes on there when there is traffic that I think you're going to down is not going. There are people who run stop signs there, usually heading south.
Okay.
The most frequent, I think, offense that I see. So creating something to slow down traffic there, maybe it's speed bump, what?
Okay.
That is something that I think will be, thank you for all.
Sure. So it was not as much of a question as it was some statements. One thing I got from that was that even if we don't do a bike lane, there are issues with Sharp Street between Pratt and Conway where we need to take a look at how we're moving traffic through and the light timing and things like that. So that's something we'll absolutely take a look at. Sure, yes. I forgot where I left off, but I know I saw this man's hand up. Yes, go ahead.
Using colors, think about what those mean. Because if you're building out something with intent to keep people safe, it needs to be pretty common throughout the entire experience throughout the city. I like the murals, I like the colors. I just think we should probably keep it fairly consistent from an experience, because I moved from out of area and I have no idea what some of these are. And I'm just like always nervous and looking through, trying to be safe. So just some uniformity there. I just would say that. The follow-up I have is around the testing measures and future, I guess the future. One is I just wondering, like, if you have that available, like for the next steps. I assume you guys have a lot of feedback. Like, what are the next steps for kind of how you're going to approach testing and taking in all the feedback and then potentially putting that back to folks to make sure we can see? Because it's really easy to throw darts at people, but it's a really hard job that you guys do. And just genuinely, I appreciate it. I like you guys on Reddit, by the way. But yeah, I just want to say thank you for that as well, and just some things to consider, and also understand what your testing measurement, how you're going to continue to keep communicating that.
Sure. So as far as next steps are concerned, obviously there were issues with the website. We're going to get that fixed. There's going to be a survey for this project. It'll ask anyone who wants to participate a series of questions, particularly about what choices we should make as far as the presentation showed. And there's general feedback at the bottom, and we're going to incorporate all that, and we're going to come back to the community probably right at the end of summer when school starts up, that first weekend maybe, and say, okay, this is all the data that we collected. These are all the comments that we received. This is the voting that we received on these different options. This is what the community has told us that they want. And so then we'll factor that into, because at the end of the day, we have to decide what's safest, not just what the community wants, but also what's safest. So we'll go through what we've gathered from you all, then compare that to what we think should happen, and then we'll come back to the community and say, okay, well, what do you guys think of this? Yes, ma'am.
Let's talk about flex posts.
Okay.
From here on in, I'm calling them plastic straws, because that's exactly what they are. The people who drive these big trucks, giant SUVs, they don't care about the flex posts. They just drive over them. And ultimately, after that happens 2 or 3 times, the things break off. And you end up with these little nubs. I don't understand why Baltimore City is obsessed with these things. Can't we have bollards or planters or something else? Please, please don't bring the flex posts into my neighborhood.
Sure. Part of the reason I think why we defer to flex posts most often is because they're inexpensive and easy for us to put up quickly, what we call quick build options. So we have a lot of communities that want flex posts or traffic calming measures. And because it's inexpensive and easy to install, it's something that we can do quickly. The more permanent, more expensive types of features take longer for us to procure, and it takes a little bit more training for our folks to install, and so it moves slower. But the idea behind flex posts is they're a temporary measure, at least they're supposed to be. And then, right. Right. And so after a while, what we're supposed to do is take those out and replace them with something more permanent, like actual curb bump outs. So that's the idea behind it, and that's why we're doing it that way. Yes, sir.
I bike around here. My partner bikes to the hospital every day. I know another neighbor of mine bikes very frequently. So I appreciate what y'all are doing. I understand and sympathize with the concerns of the drivers. I drive this as well. There's a lot of traffic there. It's a pain in the ass, but I feel very unsafe going across the intersection. Cars do kind of go faster on Sharp Street. So I also sympathize with that. And as a bicyclist, I also feel unsafe going down Sharp Street. So I think even share routes, even just some signs would help. So anyone that's opposed to this, I just urge to consider that there are neighbors of yours that feel unsafe or concerned for their safety very frequently going down the street. So appreciate the work and just wanted to make a statement of support for it.
Micah, do you have anybody online who wants to talk?
Yes, we have quite a few. I'm going to unmute Corey Ray.
Micah, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Whoop, there we go. Sorry, my volume was down. Go
Hi.
ahead.
No problem. Yes, we have Corey Ray. You are unmuted if you'd like to speak.
Yep, thank you very much. I do want to note the differentials between number of folks in-person comments and the accessibility issues of in-person. I both drive and bike through this area quite often. I just want to note previous opposition to Sharrows. I echo the opposition to Sharrows. Cars don't want to be around them.
Corey, you're fading in and out. Can you go start again?
Yes, I just want to note opposition here to Sharrows. Not a fan of Sharrows being a part of this project. I thought we were talking about a protected bike lane. And I also would like to note here that there's a connections to transit, MARC, light rail, and major bus lanes that we need to ensure accessibility to those major transit lines.
All right, thank you. Micah, you got one more?
Yes, we have 6 more. Mike, I'm going to request to unmute you and you can speak.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I have a comment. Your option 1 versus option 2 for the section between Pratt and Conway. Have you done any studies about the proportion of people that turn left onto Pratt versus the proportion of people that turn left onto Conway? I feel like the option 2 would be, as someone who rides my bike through there quite frequently, that option 2 would be much safer, as if you are on the left side of Sharp Street approaching Conway, heading south, you're not going to have to fight necessarily with the majority of drivers who are going to be turning right onto Conway to get to 395. And so if you are considering, weighing the potential safety factor of the 2 options, I really do think, as a person who rides through there probably 5 to 6 times a week, that option 2 would be a much safer option for cyclists that are coming completely through from the cycle track all the way into Otterbein.
All right, thank you. Micah, let's do one more and then we'll go back to the audience here.
Sure. We've got Alexa Blanchard. I'm going to request to unmute you.
Hey, can you all hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
great. I just wanted to echo what everybody else has said here. I take this route every single day to work. I work at the medical center. I have almost every single one of the people I work with also use this exact street to bike, even if they live farther out in other communities. This is like one of the safer roads relatively, and it still feels very unsafe with a mixture of the potholes in the road and having to go kind of avoid those potholes and avoid potential drivers that are opening their doors, as well as cars that I can hear behind me that come around and kind of cut over that middle lane very, very fast just to, avoid hitting me and the potholes at the same time. And so I'm not a fan of the share roads. I'm a huge fan of these protected bike lanes, and I can just want to sort of be the voice of anyone who works at the medical campus or anyone at West, because there are just so many of us that use this road, and I think it's important that we put a face to the people that would be using what we are talking about today. This isn't just something that's happening in theory. It will impact people that are using this every single day for their commute and would like it to be safe. So thank you all so much for making this meeting happen after the debacle the first round.
Thank you. Okay, let's start with the gentleman here.
Listen, at the Sharp Conway intersection, most of the traffic going both directions on Sharp Street turns to the west on Conway to get toward the stadium and to the freeway. Given that, can you tell me why you decided to have the cyclists cross Conway on the west side crosswalk instead of on the east side where there is far less turning traffic?
So I think the idea that Conway is a more complicated intersection. So if you're, because on Pratt, you have one-way traffic. So it's easier for cyclists, pedestrians, scooter riders, because there's less turning lanes. Intersection. But I see your point. Also, if you orient the bicyclists on the east side.
If you use option 2 and use the east side through the convention center, the crossing of Pratt is problematic because there's crossing traffic between all the cars turning left on the Pratt. But then they could continue straight across Conway on the east crosswalk and not have to battle all the traffic turning toward the freeway.
Yeah, that's a safer option.
And yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Will. I have a question kind of about the outreach process it's actually sort of directed at the councilman, which is, so when the original meeting got postponed to run this by, whoever, the institutions that you're talking about, I don't understand why that happened, because seems like it was this exact meeting where they're just presenting some options. And then you posted this wall of text about how, you got to run through this whole gambit of things before we get to the next phase. So now this quick build is not so quick. It's been, I don't know when this was, like 6 months ago, maybe, but what is the actual proper framework for like how we can expect this kind of thing to happen going forward? Like, what is the Councilman Costello checklist for when is it okay for them to reach out to us? When, because it seems like it's kind of being made up as it goes along. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not a fair characterization. What it feels like is like, oh, you got to run it by your donors or whoever first, and then come back to us. And again, maybe that's not fair, but I want to hear it from you. Like, what is this process? Because it doesn't seem like it's something else.
It's a great question. A lot of the people in this room are my campaign donors, so I appreciate you bringing that up. I've been very clear with the Department of Transportation on what the expectation is. And I've had the same set of expectations since I first joined the council in October 2014. As I mentioned earlier, this is probably 8th or 9th bicycle infrastructure project that we've gone through. Consistently, DOT has failed to reach out to institutional stakeholders to understand their operational needs. I had mentioned that earlier. What I've asked for, and again, DOT had presented a plan which was inadvertently leaked by a former staff member of DOT who's no longer here, that did not take into consideration the operations of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. It's unacceptable. We're not going to have capital projects that interrupt the operations of a national security critical infrastructure asset. We're simply not going to have that. And that's why I had to step in. And believe me, the last thing that I want to have to do is have a series of meetings with DOT to explain how community outreach is supposed to happen. But I've been very clear with them on this. I was very grateful to be invited by John Laria, who's the chair or former chair of the Mayor's Bicycle Advisory Commission, and have a 45-minute discussion with dozens of bicycle advocates from across the city, as well as members of that commission, as well as city agency officials, to talk about what the expectations are. Now, other elected officials at the local level, other council members handle this differently. There are some that are vehemently in support of bike lanes at all costs without consideration for any of these things. There are other council members that are vehemently opposed to bike lanes and simply don't care what bicycle advocates have to say. What I'm interested in is the position of the people that I've been elected to represent. That's one of the reasons that I'm here this evening. This conversation is a very important conversation. I'm not trying to dictate what your position is. I'm not trying to dictate what DOT wants to do here. I'm just trying to make sure that the Department of Transportation is adequately informed before they come out to the community and say to you, hey, we can put a dedicated bike lane in front of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond when they can't. And I don't want them to offer up things that give false hope to something that can happen that cannot actually happen. So that's where we're at. I don't want to see this project get delayed. I want to make sure that DOT does adequate community outreach. And this meeting this evening and everyone being here is an important part of that.
What the Federal Reserve Bank, do they have any?
So they are okay with this. What was leaked on Reddit by a former DOT official was one of those options included something that negatively impacted their operations, so it was a non-starter. What I didn't want to have happen was DOT come out to a community meeting 2.5 or 3 months ago and tell you this is one of the 3 options, and then have everyone in this room, and there are several folks in this room who don't live in the neighborhood, but your perspective is very important because you live in the city and you travel through the neighborhood. I didn't want those folks to say, well, we want that thing when you can't have it. So it's about the agency being honest about what the real options are. And that's why I stepped in to pause to make sure that outreach was going. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go with this gentleman, and then I'm going to come back to you, sir, with the glasses.
Okay, I wanted to say that first, I like the idea of having the bikes stay on the left side of the street crossing Pratt. But if that was going to be included in the case, I would hope that you would include a bicycle crossing light that goes green before the car light. Because right now, as it is, it's super dangerous for bikes to cross from the Maryland cycle track across that street without having cars turning at the same exact time into the bike lane. And they don't really pay attention for bikes coming across that street. So it's a really scary conflict. I even had that issue coming here where I do this when I cross that street. I try my best to get all the way over to the right side of the street before crossing Pratt there, just because the conflicts are so dangerous there. And then my main question too was that does the DOT consider Sharrow's safe bike infrastructure? Because I've seen some studies that have shown that having Sharrows on the road is probably either just as safe as having nothing, or maybe even worse, because it gives cyclists who aren't as confident on their bikes a false sense of security on that lane. And when you put them on streets that already have high speeding traffic, people running red lights, it could be a combination for disaster.
So I can try to address the first question, which was, did we consider bike lights at the intersection? Yeah, right. And one of the things that we did look at was, well, there are a couple of intersections where ideally our traffic engineer said we would love to have a separate bike signal that would give them the opportunity to cross the intersection before car traffic. The problem with that option was that A, the expense of the lights themselves, and B, the time that it would take to install them. The money that's associated with this grant has to be spent by a certain time. We didn't think we could get those installed in time. And that's why we decided to go with the options that we're showing here. But we would love to, if we'd gotten a bigger grant, we certainly would have thought about doing that idea. In conjunction with the Sharrows, the initial opinion was that this particular segment of Sharp and Otterbein is low speed, low traffic, low volume, so it would be safer for Sharrows. But certainly we could, if we were to do this, we would observe over time whether that's the state or not. And if we needed to, we could add additional traffic calming elements to slow things down, like speed bumps. So, you sir, yes.
Early on, this was slide 4, talking about the convenience for all users.
Yes.
What I don't see here is convenience for drivers. In fact, one of the first people online specifically pitted bicyclists against drivers to drive down the number of drivers. Speaking to someone, I used to be president of the Greenbelt Bicycle Coalition. I am by all means in favor of bicycle commuting. I commuted by bike for 10 years early in my life before I had a child. When I had a child, I'm sorry, driving through this city in the wintertime for evening activities with a child on a bicycle simply isn't feasible. Every step that we take that makes it harder for a parent to transport children, dance classes, gymnastics classes, to school classes, to everything on any part of the city, makes it almost impossible for families to live in Baltimore. You are driving families out of the city. I no longer allow my daughter, when she was younger, we got to the point where we would not participate in any events on the north side of the city because the city had made it so difficult to drive through downtown at rush hour, which is when these classes take place after school. So I don't see anything here making life convenient for the parent who has to transport children. They are not going to ride bicycles in the wintertime in the snow. They're not going to take buses that are going to take them an hour each way to get to an hour class. What you're doing, talk about stakeholders, what about the gymnastic places? What about the choir? We participate in private choirs on the other side of town. You're destroying their business models because their patrons, families with children, cannot live in this city.
Thank you, sir. Let's not get into a back and forth, please. Anybody else with any questions? Yes, sir.
What are the needs that are different here versus those ones? Like, is the protected bike lane a non-starter for the, I'm not saying whatever was proposed, but right, I think the sharrows are dangerous. Protected lane would be.
South Sharp Street is a non-starter, period.
So on the left turning. Okay.
Tiffany, can you go back a couple slides to show us Sharp Street at the Federal Reserve entrance? Yeah, so this is kind of, yeah, the idea here. So yeah, it's essentially kind of a compromise because there isn't enough room to do separated bike lane, southbound lane, dedicated left turn, through right, and parking at the same time. And of course, having it on this side of the street negatively impacts Federal Reserve operations, and we didn't want to do that.
Sharrows all the way to.
Solar Beach Park. Yes, sir.
Actually, negative impact on the Federal Reserve, is that because of a security concern from bicycles, or is it because of a restriction lanes for the sounds going through?
It has to do with the conflict between bicyclists and the large trucks, and the possibility that folks who work at this building need access at all hours of the day. So we didn't want to create an environment where we're putting them in conflict. Yes, ma'am.
Well, sorry. Well, after this person, we do still have a few online.
That's,
I
yeah.
need something I wish you guys really focus on.
Okay.
It takes me 20 minutes to get down Fleet Highway.
Oh, my God.
It's ridiculous. You go to one light, it turns red. You go to the next light, it turns red. Also, once upon a time, we had more police patrols in the intersections at busiest times, directing traffic. To me, I think that maybe this is something that is where there's certain times of day that you need a traffic patrol person instructing traffic that will aid in, like the woman who is here is going to work to the hospital on her bicycle. You know, when people are commuting, if we have, you know, officers in place to direct traffic, you know, people will listen more, maybe potentially stop when they need to, wait, not block the box. Also, another thing I want to mention is there is an uptick in people on their phones, smoking pot while they're driving. These are distractions, and people are going to get hit. And also, someone else mentioned, I go down William Street. There are some people who ride the wrong direction on scooters and bicycles, whip down there all the time. I know we can't control that, but there are a lot of cyclists who don't follow road laws and are riding on the wrong side of the road, etc. To me, traffic lights being timed well and humans at intersections during the busiest time of the day could maybe alleviate some of these potential accidents.
Okay. I can't speak to the second part of that, but I know with regard to the lights and the timing, that is an issue that we acknowledge and that we've sought additional grant money to try to solve that problem. A very small percentage of the lights in the city are remotely controlled. And that's something that we're going to try to address in the future, being able to adjust that so that we can assist with traffic flow. Absolutely.
That instead of being more.
Sure.
And it's kind of
Right. Okay, let's just take a couple more folks from online because I know they've been waiting patiently. Micah, do you have any folks?
Yes, we have John Bremerman. I'm going to request to unmute you, and you can unmute yourself.
Yep, good evening. Thank you for having this meeting tonight and taking my comments. I also wanted to say something a little bit about north of Pratt Street. There's great work going on both sides of Pratt Street, all the development in South Baltimore. We've got a lot of great new businesses that have popped up since the pandemic, the ones that survived. There's a tremendous amount of growth occurring north of Pratt Street. The Bromo Art Walk was a tremendous success. There's a beer garden that popped up on Packard Street. There's a lot of apartment construction, and there's a lot of desire for each side of the 11th district to kind of commingle. And I have to say that Pratt Street is a bit of a barrier. It definitely needs crossing Pratt Street makes the whole experience a lot more dangerous. The Sharrows, unfortunately, do not provide the protection for cyclists, dockless customers. It creates hazards, and I think Councilman Costello, I appreciate you having everybody in this room. You have support from Baltimore as well as the folks in Otterbein, and I think this is a great first step to helping us, continue to chip away at this and making the 11th district more connected and safer for all. And that's all I had. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Micah, you got one more?
Yes, we have 4 more. I'm going to unmute Graham Carroll Allen.
Hi, everyone. This is Graham Carell Allen. I'm a public artist and placemaker. And actually, one of my traffic calming artworks was featured earlier in this presentation. Thank you, Councilman Costello, for pulling together this room. And I appreciate hearing everyone's voices. I was just taking this road down on my bike to get to Baltimore Peninsula for Nick's Crabs. And then I came up and hit up Moo Moo Cow ice cream, and it was great. I do agree with a lot of the past commentators that, the Sharrows are kind of a nice symbolic gesture, but practically speaking, they're not going to improve the safety for any of us. But I think, reading the political room here, obviously, we're not going to get a cycle track, even though there are plenty of cycle tracks next to federal reserves and other parts of the country. It's clear that we can't get that in Baltimore for whatever reasons that may be. That being said, if this is what we're going to get, I would really advocate for DOT and anyone in the community who does care for the lives of folks who, for either by choice or due to circumstance, are taking things like scooters and bikes, who are relying on this infrastructure to try to make it as safe as possible for us. And so maybe some additional features like the speed cushions that have a little gap, maybe a wide gap in them, big enough for the Federal Reserve trucks to get past without having to hit a bump, but still enough of a speed cushion to kind of slow down cars. And the same thing with those bump outs. That's always a great thing. It doesn't have to have art in it. Just to kind of clear up any questions about that, it doesn't have to have like fun teal and blue colors. It could just be red brick or whatever you all pick in your neighborhood. Ultimately, those projects are always community driven. And so I just wanted to clarify that. The bump outs don't come with art. That's always community driven, and typically is because someone in the community steps up and writes a grant and hires a local artist. So, and those grants can also pay for things like planters that would look historically consistent. And those types of little gestures would go a long way towards making this facility something a little bit better than what's currently being proposed. So thank you all very much.
All right, thank you, Graham. Micah, you want to go ahead?
Thank you. Yep, we have Jan Paul Miller. Jan, you can unmute yourself. Okay, moving on to the next. Phil Lovegren, you can unmute yourself.
sorry. Okay, sorry. I just want to say briefly, because there's been a lot that has been said about Sharrows. I know that, in very low traffic residential streets, etc. I mean, I will bike all the time on streets that aren't necessarily protected. It's not unreasonable in and of itself. But the comments of people like, I believe it was Alexa earlier, about her experience and others riding down that area is very important to take into account. The other thing is that, part of the point of these projects isn't just to accommodate current cyclists, but to encourage people who aren't, who have been a bit fearful or otherwise not comfortable. And this includes families with children, etc. And Sharrows don't do anything to accommodate or encourage those new cyclists. So as we move forward, I just encourage DOT to minimize Sharrows to the extent possible. And if you're not going to, at least just recognize that you're leaving a lot of impact on the table. This is not what it was intended to be. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. We have one more raised hand.
We'll wrap it up with that one because we're at the end of our rented time here today. So. Micah?
Sorry, we have this one last raised hand.
Sure.
I'm sorry. I think we have. Carter Reitman.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. And thank you to BDOT for managing this meeting. I can tell it's really contentious and y'all are trying really hard, so I really appreciate that. One I would say is that I do prefer option 2 for the crossing at Pratt Street. That makes more sense to me. I would concur with everyone who's already spoken that I'm disappointed that a protected bike lane is not included as one of the options for south of Conway Street. And I had a couple questions directed towards that. One question is, it was mentioned that there's a conflict between truck drivers coming into the Federal Reserve and bicyclists if there were a protected bike lane. I was hoping you could get into a little more what the nature of that conflict is so we can better understand it. And second, if that's not a problem that can be fixed, why is removal of a parking lane not a potential option for the creation of a protected bike lane? Thanks so much.
Excuse me.
So I can't, well, I'll address the parking situation first. My understanding was that previous to my working on this project, there was a proposal initially to eliminate, I think it was like 4 or 5 spaces right at the intersection in this slide. And what we discovered later was that I think that the spaces that are there by an act of the city council. So you'd have to go back to the city council to try to remove them. And that was such a roadblock. But I'm going to let Councilman Costello speak to that.
Yeah, so the proposal now does not eliminate parking spaces. Otterbein is in Area 8, which is one of the 51 residential permit parking areas in the city, or also known as RPP. There is a possibility, as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, of approximately 6, at most 7 spaces being eliminated on the 400 block of South Sharp Street on the east-hand side, which would be the northbound lane, as you approach the intersection of West Conway Street. And that would be if, after implementation of this, there became traffic volume issues for vehicles with the protected left lane heading on West Conway Street to I-95 and I-395. A removal, I just want to be upfront with everyone, a removal of an entire parking lane on either side of the street isn't going to happen on this project. And that's the simple reality. And I think what DOT has tried to do here is kind of balance all of, the various interests to make the road usable for everyone. With respect to the Federal Reserve, I have addressed this about 3 times this evening. I will address it once more. And I know there are individuals online who have suggested that a shared bike lane can go in front of a Federal Reserve bank. The folks that manage the operations and the security of the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond in Otterbein do not want it there. It creates a number of safety issues, and it creates issues with folks who have concerns about vehicles, rightfully so, being in a protected bike lane. This is a complaint we get all of the time in Mount Vernon with the Maryland Cathedral Liberty, sorry, I can't speak today, cycle track. And we are not going to have enforcement come out and tell an 18-wheeler or an armored truck that has $10 million cash in it that they can't be there. And that's just an operational reality. And I recognize that that may upset some people. That may not be what you're looking for, but that is an operational reality that needs to be taken into consideration when thinking about a capital project like this. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councilman. That is going to conclude our time tonight. As I said before, we're going to have the website up and running. There's going to be a survey at the bottom of it, and we're going to have all of you who want to participate be able to go to that site and indicate to us. We've kind of broken the segments down in that survey. So you can say, I like option 1 or 2 here. I like option 1 or 2 here. And then at the bottom, anything else that you want to tell us, you know, speed bumps, artwork, anything else, especially the information about all the traffic signals in the city, you can tell us.
I do the online.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
Sure, no problem.
You know, I was thinking, I mean, I had this